Welcome to the Predictable Revenue Podcast, where sales leaders teach you what's working for them and how you can build it yourself.
This episode of the Predictable Revenue Podcast is brought to you by our sales coaching and consulting services. Are you looking to create repeatable, scalable, and predictable revenue? We've helped thousands of companies grow their business with tailored expert advice backed by testing to ensure they establish the best practices that'll work for them. Head over to bit.ly/predictable revenue coaching to learn more.
What's up, everybody? I'm Colin, and I'm going to be your host today, talking to Michael Gaudet in our third and final episode of the B2B Demand Gen Channel arc. Now, we are talking about big deals today, $50,000 deals plus, and the demand gen channels that you can use to find them. We're going to talk a little bit about ABM, about account-based marketing, account-based sales. We're going to talk about user conferences. I was initially confused because I just read conferences, but we're actually going to go into user conferences, though I do detour to conferences, and then we make our way back. We're going to land with review sites and things like Gartner. And then we got a couple other surprises and some things that we haven't really covered. And we just wanted to wrap this episode up in a bow. Now, if you are in sales and you're wondering, what the heck is this doing on a sales podcast? Well, I always like to bring in different opinions, different perspectives. And I think this is a really interesting one because it shows you all the work that goes into maybe creating some of the demand gen channels or some of the meetings or some of the leads that have been activated in the CRM that you're sitting there facing. So I think there's kind of two reasons why I wanted to have this out there. First off, an understanding and an appreciation for the dark arts of marketing. They're not really dark arts. They're just people with similar goals on the kind of other side of the tools, or maybe in a slightly different tool that feeds into your CRM. The second piece is, I think, by listening to all of these and gaining this understanding of where these leads came from, or where this interaction, where this activity came from, I'm hoping that you're going to be able to find out ways of leveraging this activity into a better sales development sequence, campaign, cadence, whatever you use. So with that being said, if you're just interested in demand gen marketing, this is the episode for you. If you are looking for ways of differentiating your sequences based on what your marketing team's working on, standing on the shoulders of at least the people in marketing, this is going to be an interesting episode. Here it is. Michael, welcome back to the show.
Thanks for having me for number 3.
For episode number 3. This is our third and final episode. We are talking about large deals. So we are talking specifically $50,000 a year and larger. I know there are grades and gradients above there, but they just become fewer and fewer and fewer, and personally a little bit less interesting because there are fewer. We'll probably touch on some of them that will work for larger deal sizes, but just didn't feel like it warranted another episode. And so if you haven't checked out the other two, this is our third episode in a series that we're doing on growth go-to-market channels for different deal sizes. And this is the third and final episode. We are basically focusing on $50,000 and up. But let's start off with, what are some of the leading indicators of success as we're moving into larger deals? We're moving into longer sales cycles, more complex sales funnels. So talk to me about, what are some of the ways that we're measuring these go-to-market channels at this larger deal size?
Yeah, no, that's a good question. So basically, when you are talking about deals that can take, call it over a year for these deals in a lot of cases, right? Like a year, 2 years, 3 years. If you're talking about government, it could even be, longer than that potentially, which obviously huge benefit in terms of the stickiness of those contracts once landed. But this is where understanding what's going on in your pipeline and having that, to coin your company's name, the predictable revenue, is just so important, right? Because making decisions with the sort of final KPI, just jump ahead a little bit, of how much revenue was yielded from those efforts, that's not going to do the trick. You need to be able to understand what is actually going to happen based on the pipeline that exists today. So really having that nailed in terms of those objective definitions from stage to stage, having the automations in place whereby you're sort of taking it out of the hands of the subjective human and sort of putting it in the hands of more of a more systematized approach, if you will. And again, I guess we'll cite your friend from Zendesk and her abilities to do so. What was her name again?
JB Buss.
Yes, Jamie Voss. So basically getting that in place. So basically, if in order to understand that said, in order to understand what's going well from a month to month perspective to, shift resources, shift tactics appropriately, really just looking at what's going on from that pipeline revenue perspective in terms of new pipeline that's being generated. From the marketing sort of channels, from the tactics that you're doing, and understanding based on your expectations of pipeline closing, or your historical, even better, of pipeline closing when does get to that initial stage. So stage one, what is the expected revenue, and what does that look like from an ROI perspective on not only your ad spend, but how much do you spend on that agency as well, or that contractor, or that internal resource that you're using in order to sort of execute on that channel. So really just having that button down is pretty darn important. And I say that not only from a per channel perspective, but also in aggregate, in order to hold your sort of marketing leadership team to account from a month to month basis.
Love it. I think to me, the things that I've been, because we've had a couple of weeks in between these to really bring the information together in my head. The things that I've been coming back to are, there's the sort of volume and the conversion rate elements from kind of stage to stage. Then there's the looking back on that pipeline and kind of figuring out, okay, when does this get to a 20% win rate kind of stage, and looking at that on a pipeline source or go-to-market source basis was really interesting. And I'm actually pulling this from a podcast I did with the Refine Labs people. I'm not sure if that's published yet, so I don't want to spoil the episode, but there's either an interesting episode that just came out or one that is about to come out where we kind of talk about the different sources there. But that's been an interesting piece in terms of like the measuring, when a deal gets to, or when is it, at what stage in the pipeline is a deal likely 25% likely to close based on the historicals from that specific deal source. Something that I admittedly never really looked about, something, and I think it's something that you have been talking about, but it just didn't kind of click in my head that like, oh yes, of course, to looking at these metrics, not in aggregate, but in, I guess, specific for each go-to-market channel or each go-to-market source.
Yeah. And one thing to note too is that different executives, different boards, different venture capital groups or private equity groups will have their own sort of flavor for when they actually do consider something real. Some say, it needs to be at least 20%. Some say it needs to be coin flip or better before they will actually sort of consider it as part of the revenue calculation or revenue forecast for the year.
Mm-hmm. Totally fair. Totally fair. I think a lot of that, my perspective, and I'm curious yours.
Yeah.
I think a lot of that depends on the speed and the predictability of your sales motion.
Mm-hmm.
Like if you're working on, I could definitely see if I'm working on a 3-year deal, like trying to do that pipeline, or like if I'm trying to forecast out my pipeline or my future revenue based on, a 3-year sales cycle, that's going to be quite challenging. You're going to have lots of information, but in terms of, I could see wanting to have a higher likelihood of closing before I put anything in forecast. Whereas if you've got something that's a $10,000, like the gradient is probably less important. With a $10,000 sale, you're gonna have a lot more of those.
Well, I mean, there's also something to consider too. There's software out there that's sort of layers in on top of Salesforce and that sort of thing. Like Insight Squared is the one that comes to mind, whereby what it does is that it looks at not necessarily, I don't know if it takes into account the GTM channel that resulted in the opportunity. I think it might, but it does look at the salesperson and their history, right? What is the what is the push rate? So the amount of times or the percentage of time that the deal actually gets pushed out. What's the average number of days that does actually happen, and that sort of thing. So you have like sort of the unadulterated Salesforce forecast based on what's in Salesforce, but then you have this Insight Squared one, which is essentially layering in the human behavior that has sort of happened. So that's kind of interesting as well. And I don't know as much about it. And we were talking a little bit before this call about, it'd be great if we had the time to dig in on all the tools that we're kind of interested in, finding out more on, and, understanding exactly what's going on with Gong, for example, and sort of the improvements that they're making. And they're actually seeking to do the same kind of thing as Insight Squared, except based on how the conversations go, the keywords that are contained within the conversation, when is signature mentioned, when is contract mentioned, that kind of stuff, right? So that's also something that's pretty interesting. Like AI is going to have a role to play in this. And it's just that sort of next level beyond the if-then rules that we're thinking of, actually having it a bit more, I guess, multifaceted or, complex than that.
It'll be certainly, and I don't want to turn this into like a what if AI episode, but I think building on that, I've been playing with ChatGPT and OpenAI for the last kind of 6 months. It's both the most impressive thing and the most disappointing thing you can kind of play with when you look at like starting to write, understanding complexity and really pulling out like nuance. That it can summarize a podcast. But it's not going to pull out it's not going to pull the through line, like a human listener would. It can transcribe it beautifully, but to listen to this episode and say, okay, well, these are the really important bits, and this is how it all kind of came together. I don't think it's quite there yet. It can't pull out like the table of contents structure, at least from what I've seen and what I've been attempting. And maybe I'm just need to work on my prompt engineering. Because I've been trying to like, how do I take this podcast and turn it into like a training plan? There's some interesting stuff, but then, with the summary that we pulled the other day was like, it pulled the whole recording, and the summary it provided was about Sarah and I working on fixing our audio and lighting issues. That was the whole summary of, we gave it an hour and 15 episode. It's like Colin and Sarah, adjust the mic and try and, and they eventually persevere and get the episode recorded.
Wow.
It's like, so yeah, I think there's like an element of prompt engineering that I need to work on for that particular one. I think the interesting piece is that, yes, like when you look at like AI and forecasting and how that has implications to sales, the voice, transcribing the voice means we're going to get so much better information and data into our CRM. The question is, what can Gong and what can your Salesforce do with that, other than just like, that's better than if this, then that kind of statements? Because I think you and I could probably design some pretty interesting, like, if, that we could implement manually with a rep, and that I've probably done as a sales manager. And did they talk about this? Did they ask about the contracting process? Did they ask this question? Did they ask that question?
Yep.
You don't necessarily need AI to like forecast the deal for you. It just can tell you these kind of binary points. And I don't feel, or from what I've experienced, it's not quite at the point of like discovering any magic sauce that a human hasn't already figured out yet.
Yeah, I don't disagree. I mean, I think it's interesting. Like, I think probably when I was playing around over the holidays with it as well, and I find it's more of a Google killer or a Google answer box killer, right? Like, you put in things, and I actually put in, for example, how do I figure out my ICP or my ideal client profile? And what it came out with, I'm like, that's pretty bang on. Like, well done. So, I see it as being like a good first result, only result scenario for search. But in terms of that more complex thing, like you described, in terms of like pull out and summarize this podcast, I'm not surprised that it's not really there yet, and it sounds like it's a long way off. Although I guess this is like technology one or iteration one of it. So I guess I'm willing to cut it a bit of slack, but we'll see where it goes.
And there's probably a little bit of PEBCAC there, like problem exists between keyboard and chair, with regards to like the prompts I was giving it. So I don't want to crap on our future AI overlords. I
Yeah.
think you did a great job, OpenAI.
That's smart. That's very smart of you to say. I mean, I have Terminator 5 in mind and them coming back to you and that not being a great outcome.
So
But yeah, I mean, in any case, I mean, getting back to what we were chatting about, like, when you have sales, it's basically it's almost common sense, right? If you have sales cycle that's very, very, very long, you can't wait till the end in order to understand what works and what doesn't work. So that's why you need the rigor on the front end and throughout the process in order to understand what's really going on. And I think we went into, Jamie Buss's podcast and that sort of thing. And we went into quite a bit of detail as to what those stages should kind of look like, just from a parameters perspective that people can refer back to. But you need to have that buttoned up.
100%. With that being said, so let's jump into channels.
Sure.
The channels we're going to talk about, we've kind of pre-gamed this a little bit. We're going to talk first about ABM, then user conferences, and then review sites. And we've got a few others, but is that kind of the gist of the next channels we're going to talk about here?
Yeah, that's fair. And to the point you made earlier, like, we talked in the mid size part of this. We spoke about a lot of things that are still relevant for large. So I'd encourage the listeners to go back and listen to that. But really tried to focus on the stuff that's really relevant for the 50K plus sort of CAC audience. So yeah, no, let's totally do that.
Perfect. So let's jump in with ABM. So we've got account-based marketing, account-based sales. Talk to me about what it is from your perspective, what's involved, and then we could jump off from there.
So ABM, more than anything, is a buzzword, right? It's like, so, and what I mean by that is just it gets shot around so much, right? And I think that people say it because they, it's maybe what their bosses have told them before or what they heard at the conference or something like that, right? But account-based marketing, I mean, just don't even sort of to demystify it. It's essentially like you're being very, very picky about who you are going after here. Right? Like that's essentially what it is. Like you have a list of companies and some examples could be maybe you're going after the Fortune 1000, maybe you're going after the Fortune 5000, although that would be arguably too big of a list. But maybe you're going after, ones with this SIC code or something like that within the Fortune 5000 or something like that. So you have a manageable number of prospective clients that you are really dedicating yourself from both a sales and a marketing perspective of giving the white glove treatment to and ensuring that you're getting in front of them in whatever way that you can with the right message and that sort of thing. And like I always say, sales and marketing should work together and it's all revenue and that sort of thing. But when it comes to this stuff is even more important that they work together. The touch points are understood with each of the, with all the stakeholders, that sort of thing. So it's really just, going very specific with who you're targeting and coming up with a concerted strategy across sales and marketing. That's appropriate for them.
Love it. In my head, I think ABM is less about the list criteria and more about specific. I want to see names on a list if I'm going to invest in ABM, because we're talking about, we're not talking about small investments here. And specifically with this ABM, I think the way you framed it up is we are creating campaigns, or we are creating marketing materials of any kind specifically for a company. And there's different grades of ABM or account-based sales. But I think that was just the kind of one piece that I think there's a broader ABM approach. And then there might be a little bit more honed approach of, these are the list criteria. Then even more focused would be like these, 100 companies. And then there's these 10 companies, this one company. And that's where we start to get in from like account-based marketing being I think the first touch to like maybe an account-based sales development or account-based sales rep, which would be like your traditional SAP, Oracle, kind of HP salespeople that own a single account. Is that does that check with like how you see the different grades?
Yep. No, that completely makes sense. And yeah, in terms of, how this actually happens and that sort of thing. I mean, just from from a marketing perspective, there's actually a number of solutions that are out there. Demand-based / Terminus, that's one option. And when you think about these platforms, what they do is that they essentially, you're advertising on LinkedIn because that it's the richest sort of source of information that you could target against, that sort of thing. But it also targets within other networks and does retargeting as well and that sort of thing. But imagine that you program in the list of companies that you're seeking to go after, the roles that you're seeking to influence in whatever way, and the associated messages with those roles or assets that you want to get in front of those people or what have you, and even where they are in the sales process, which is known. So basically you would have sort of Salesforce or HubSpot or whatever synced up to this, whereby it would actually change the message if they are sort of viewing you for the first time versus they've interacted with some material that you have versus their MQL or SQL, or they're actually midway through the sales process, for example. But these clients are so important that you want to actually stay top of mind, and you're willing to spend the money to stay top of mind with them throughout the sales process, to sort of be in front of them, even if they're in call it contracting. You still want to be there. And what's your best foot forward message on LinkedIn that they're seeing every day or every couple of days, right? And what does the decision maker view versus the gatekeeper of IT who's going to say yes or no to this investment based on security or what have you, right? So it's that kind of specificity, and that's the thing whereby if people are like, oh well, my target audience that I want to go after is 500 companies. Yeah, try doing that for 500 companies. It's going to take a lot of time, right? Mm-hmm. So that sort of helps to focus the mind in terms of how it works, kind of thing. And then the next level down from that, as you described, is sort of like, imagine that you're using these softwares and you're seeing the companies, you're putting this out to, let's say, 50 companies or whatever, and you have this very, very targeted approach. Who's interacting with the ads? How are they interacting? Are they coming to site? Who's sort of behaving on site in what ways? And then feeding that information to sales, right? And having sales know that these people actually, they are pretty interested, so they would be more receptive to that phone call or what have you. And one of the things that we spoke about before is when does that handshake kind of happen between marketing and sales and that kind of thing. For this, it's a bit more guerrilla, if you will, in the way of like, hey, if SAP, let's use SAP as an example, right? Let's say somebody from SAP that you're looking to sell into is actually going to your site and that sort of thing. Are you going to wait for them to download the ebook? You know what I mean? Like, or are you going to place that call, right? And it really is a shared sort of KPI, and that sort of thing is kind of how I would think about it. With this kind of stuff. And then, when do you get the fun account-based sales stuff going, whereby, like I'm not an expert on direct mail and that sort of thing. Like I'm more, biased towards the digital channels, but, like when you think about ABS, when you think about account-based sales, send a case of Yeti mugs or whatever, travel mugs, and with a note saying like, and with their logo and your logo on it and saying, let's have coffee. Like that kind of stuff, right? Where you're okay, you'll pay, $3,000 for that lead because of what it can provide your organization, right? So it's interesting. There's lots of work involved in this, but it's really focused. It's not tremendously scalable. ABM allows it to have that wider reach, which is kind of nice. But by wider, I don't mean 500, I mean 50 or 100 kind of thing.
Mm-hmm. And I think if you're, what, let me park that thought. From a dollar perspective, you said $3,000 per lead. Is that pretty typical, or kind of what's the range? What's the scale here?
I mean, it all depends on the economics of it, right? Because if it costs $3,000 to get a lead, and 1 out of every 3 leads, which would be pretty awesome. But if you're actually using this strategy, you should have a higher conversion rate. Hopefully, like that should be the case. So let's say 1 out of every 3 leads actually becomes an opportunity, and let's say your opportunities, you have 20% of them that actually close. So essentially, that would be $50K, I think, for that acquisition. if my math is correct, right? So 10K, 3K for the lead, 10K for the op-ish. I know it's 9. I'm just making my life easy. And then from there, 5X that for the 20%. So essentially, are you okay paying 50K to acquire, right? Which is, backs into nicely what we were thinking about in terms of, what's the min for the large size company, right? If you're okay with that, if you'll do that every day, because the contract you're signing, let's say the contract you're signing is 50K, but you have but you have strong retention, that sort of thing from an ARR perspective, or let's say it's 100K, then you'll do that all day. Different companies have different sort of tolerances in terms of what does that actually look like, with what that return is immediately on it, and that first year ARR that's expected. So yeah, I mean, 3K is not out of the realm of what would make sense in terms of costs.
And pretty fantastic if you're closing a $250,000 deal. Like,
yeah, exactly.
Pretty strong return.
Yeah.
Because then if you're trying to factor in like total CAC, I mean, this is just the cost of the meeting. If you're factoring in total CAC, it's gonna grow from there when you factor in the cost of your sales organization.
Yep. Totally.
But I digress. So that's what else, before we move on to user conferences, what else do we need to consider when you're thinking about, is ABM a good fit for, for me, if I'm thinking from a go-to-market channel perspective?
Yeah. I mean, I'd argue that this is more for sophisticated marketing organizations, like this, because one thing is that you need sales and marketing alignment, in place, figured out, that sort of thing. As well, the systems that we're talking about being in place and figured out would be, you need to have your marketing automation figured out. You need to have your CRM figured out. You need to have a strong digital marketer to sort of, have hands on the keyboard for this thing, or a strong agency partner potentially. I haven't encountered very many agencies that can do this really, really well, because it is just such a, ingrained incestuous sort of thing that you're doing, right, with the org. And it's
more of a team sport too. It's not necessarily like,
yep.
Don't take away from this that like there's a single marketer that can do all of this for you. Like there's lots that's going on here.
No, and the idea of like, do you have an organization that is that is okay with the idea of like, firstly, okay with the idea of a $3,000 cost per lead, right? A lot of people can't wrap their head around that, right? Like it's kind of interesting, as well as the idea of like, okay, we're doing this ABM strategy. We're dedicating, I don't know, $500,000 to it this year, that sort of thing. And the CRO is leading the effort, or the VP of marketing, VP of sales are partnering on this. And they own it together. And this is what they're accountable to. This is what they believe the ROI is going to be from it. Be it the actual ROI or the pipeline ROI in terms of expected revenue. So you need to be able to have an organization that can sort of handle that too, right? And leaders that are mature enough to sort of share a goal, which most of the time I don't recommend, but in this case, it's kind of the only option.
I think the leaders mature enough to share a goal, and the maybe political capital, social capital to make a longer term investment, because something of this scale is not something you can flip on for 3 months.
No, this isn't a 3-month test, that sort of thing. I mean, you're only really going to get it to fruition at the end of, a sales cycle. And even then, you have that sort of ramp period where you're kind of figuring things out to some extent and that sort of thing. So, if your sales cycle's 2 years, this is maybe a 3-year initiative.
Side question, and I can't remember if we covered this or if this is from a previous conversation I've had elsewhere. From when you're ramping a new channel like ABM, how many sales cycles are you generally thinking about as like, what's the test? What's the scale period? Like, is the first one going to be great, or do you need to kind of go through it a few cycles? Do you need to go through a few cycles before you really land it?
Yeah. Well, I mean, the thing about this is you don't get away from the leading indicator KPIs that you're accountable to and you're optimizing against on a daily basis, weekly basis, that sort of thing, right? So basically, like, let's say the goal is to, we're launching this. We want to drive this many, deep website views, let's say, or or this many, because you need to have the contact information from the folks in order to sort of go after them, in order to link them to their cookie that they've sort of gone to the website with, and that sort of thing. So it's almost like, it's the okay, we're willing to pay $1,000 for a good sort of outreach for a salesperson to do, right? So essentially, they know who this person is. They are able to contact them. They know that they've been to the website and have gone 3 pages deep. Let's say, for example, right? We're willing to pay $1,000 for that, because 1 out of 3 of those will become a lead, and we will be able to reach out to them effectively and that sort of thing. So basically, like, you want to be able to monitor what's going on with that, because the precursor to a 3-page website visit and that sort of thing is, okay, are they actually clicking through on the ad? Are they not clicking through on the ad? Where are we sort of going right, going wrong? And then they come to the site. Are they bouncing? Are they not bouncing? And that sort of thing. So you're optimizing against those things. So you should see improvement in the leading indicators. I would say month over month over month over month. That's what you should be hoping for, right? Or I shouldn't say hoping for. That's what you're holding that digital marketer accountable to, is that kind of stuff. And if they're doing their job right, the first month should be the worst month, right? And they're improving and optimizing based on the results that are coming across.
Gotcha. Okay. So I appreciate that. And moving on to user conferences, this is always a fun one, because these can be fun investments. I've certainly made a few conference investments poorly, because they were fun, because we knew some people, because we just wanted to go to it, and there was no revenue goals or anything sort of tied to it. I feel like this is one of those, it has to be one of the easiest go-to-market channels to just spend a whole bunch of money with really low ROI on. So talk to me about how, when you say user conferences, talk to me about, let's zoom in on exactly what we're talking about. And then because I think they're, you go.
So it's very important that I differentiate between just normal conferences and user conferences, right? So by user conferences, I mean, this is mainly sort of a SaaS thing, I would say. And basically, this is a conference by which your existing clients, you are inviting them to, and they come to in order to network, in order to learn of what's going on with the software, how best to utilize it, what's coming up on the roadmap, all that sort of stuff, right? And so, and I won't speak in detail on the advantages of this from a decrease of churn and increase of organic revenue from existing clients. Those should all be goals that are pegged against such an investment as well. But what I want to talk about is just how I've sort of seen it in action, with some of the companies I've worked with. And Benevity does a really, really strong user conference, and they continue this. Which is great. Some companies monetize it a little bit in the sense of, even just recouping to pay the cost kind of thing. So charging, $500 to go to the conference or what have you. And some, are willing to sort of take it on whole hog and pay expenses and that sort of thing. You have to sort of make that determination as to how is this going to impact the bottom line in terms of improving the retention, improving the organic client growth from a revenue perspective, as well as the prospective client impact. Right. And so basically where this comes into play for the larger CAC sort of clients that you're thinking of is that if you're talking about a large client or a client that's strategically important in whatever way, maybe it's a new geo or something like that, inviting them to these conferences, right? Inviting them to the user conference, right? See what we're all about. Chat with our super duper happy clients that are kind of like you and you respect and that sort of thing, right? And that goes a hell of a long way, right? I mean, I think I might have referenced him before, Marshall McLuhan, the medium's a message, right? If you're SAP and if you're having a chat with Oracle, let's say, and Oracle's using this software, and Oracle's, 3 drinks, 4 drinks deep and telling you, they're the best, the software is the best, the people are the best, you're going to take that to the bank, right? Versus, Collins calling you from the company and trying to sell you and that sort of thing, right? So, and I would say that you can invite those folks. You don't want too many of them because you want them to feel special, right? That kind of idea. But the ones that are very big, the ones that are very meaningful, if you are able to close them, inviting them, like, no matter where they are in the, like, I'd say they should be an opportunity, because you are spending a fair bit on them and that sort of thing. But basically they could be early stage opportunity, and that could accelerate the deal. Which would be really cool. That can increase the probability of it closing, build those relationships with the salesperson who is working that account would obviously be there as well. And along with who would they potentially be working with, right? Like the client success person that they'd be collaborating with, that sort of idea. And it's, it feels good for them. It helps de-risk the decision for them, that sort of thing. So that's why I'm pretty high on user conferences from that perspective.
And what are we talking about? I heard you say $500 per user to recover costs. Is that a pretty fair guideline, or what do you see as the kind of, what's the range?
So, I mean, I've been to user conferences where, Will Smith performed. That's going to have a different sort of cost profile. Like that was Marketo, I think, and in Vegas. So, like, they have different profiles. You could do it however you sort of like. I mean, I shot out $500. I mean, you want to make it like, I mean, and the people that you're inviting from the whale organizations, you're not charging them. Like, that's, you're making it as frictionless as possible for them to come. That kind of thing. I mean, that said, maybe like you want to create a bit of friction, so you make sure they're not just using you for a free trip to Vegas or something. So maybe they're paying hotel and airfare or that sort of thing. But yeah, so I mean, sky's the limit with these sort of things. I mean, I've seen ones where it's free. If you want to go to HubSpots, for example, I'm sure you can get a free pass, that kind of thing. And I've seen ones where, it's kind of like F you, it's $3,000 for everyone. Doesn't matter.
Yeah. I've seen, I didn't see it personally. I talked to the person who set it up, and I think they picked their like 3 happy customers and 3 prospects. I can't remember the exact ratio, but it was under 10 customers total. And they flew them in a private jet to this mountaintop in Europe and like raced Lamborghinis and Ferraris and things.
Interesting.
For a day, and then flew people back. But
that's a micro user conference sort of deal. And I mean, depending on the companies, I could see that working.
They were 7 or 8 figure deals. So they were very, very large deals where you're flying in the very, very senior people that are exceptionally hard to reach. But hey, you want to go race Ferraris in Italy or something like that? That's an easy yes.
What about the Yeti mugs? Come on.
One weekend of fun versus a lifetime of cold beer.
Yes, exactly. You gotta weigh these things. Wow. No, that's interesting. I've not actually heard about that. I have heard about basically what you would do is sort of, you would go to a city and basically, have a lights out dinner kind of thing with current clients, as well as like, call it one new one or whatever, that they're part of the group, or one prospective one, I should say. And so they're part of the group. They're fly on the wall-ish kind of thing. And they have a great time. They get to network a bit. They get some great food and some great wine.
Love it. Kind of that steak dinner. I think that was one of the core like Salesforce go-to-market motions in the early days.
Oh yeah.
At least Mark wrote about it in his book. So but yes, we actually, after reading that book, and I think Aaron had maybe been involved in some of those at Salesforce, we actually did a couple of those in Santa Monica, and they were certainly profitable.
Oh, great.
A whole lot of work to put on though.
Yeah.
And so another piece of like the team involved, I think we had one person doing it, but this was the thing that they focused on for that month.
Yep. No, totally. Huh. That's interesting. And that's a good, I like your widening of the definition of that. And I'm trying to come up with a sort of term that would be all encompassing. It's essentially that mixing of, current and perspective, that doesn't make the current clients feel like they are being sort of showboated out kind of thing, and enhancing your relationship with them as well as advancing where you are with those perspectives, right? So any sort of event whereby you can do that.
I think a scaled, like a steak dinner is just a scaled down user conference. You've
Yep.
got a couple of users, you've got a specific ratio of users to prospects.
Yep.
And there's a get, which is steak dinner, or, you get to come to a conference and the Foo Fighters are going to be there.
Yep.
Like, I think that's the last one I went to for Salesforce, the Dreamforce. The
Oh,
Foo Fighters
nice.
and the Killers played.
Oh, sweet. Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. No Will Smith, but I'm just joking. I'd much prefer to see those guys for sure.
Punch me in the face with that one.
Just a Big Willie style. Yeah.
So from a user conference perspective, we are talking about, this is a scaled up approach. This is not, we could have a steak dinner, or we could have, hundreds of customers, and there's probably different grades in between, or, sizes in between. Are there specific things, if we jump on that larger user conference, what kind of goes into, like, what are the kind of key elements? We've talked about the kind of 500 to sky's the limit kind of price range per user or per attendee. What kind of goes into these conferences?
So one thing that I'm just sort of thinking about as you were sort of talking about the sort of scaled down size, the scaled down one, I mean, that's not going to be one whereby you are understanding their product pain points at a granular level and that sort of thing, right? You're connecting with these folks and you're understanding how it's going at a high level and that kind of thing. But it's more about generating that, improving your relationship with them in a general sense, as well as advancing that new client revenue, right? Like that's basically the goal. Whereas the user conference, it's actually on the other side of the continuum in terms of like the core focus of it is actually more about like having those existing clients be as happy as possible, as knowledgeable as possible, leveraging your software as much as possible in the best way, so that they use you more, so that they get more value, so that they, deepen their relationship with you, be it a higher subscription rate or what have you, right? So the focus is very much different.
Customer marketing as opposed to net new prospect.
Yeah,
marketing.
Exactly. It's the net new is more of just icing on the cake of a user conference versus being the cake, which is the steak dinner. So many mixed food analogies on this one. Hopefully everybody can keep up with this weird logic.
Mm-hmm. Ooh, and it's a great, I'm glad you added that, because I think I was thinking through the lens of, as somebody in my position would, net new, but also customer focused. Selling to your existing customers is obviously, the fastest path, the best path to continuous revenue. So from a user conference perspective, what else haven't we covered here?
Yeah.
Before we jump
So
to the next one?
I'll just sort of lay out a generic agenda of what it would kind of look like in a lot of cases, right? Basically, you have like a night one where people come in and it's just like a meet and greet social kind of thing. Day two, the CEO gets up and just sort of is like state of the nation, what's going on from a high level, that sort of thing. And then after that, and this is depending on the size of the firm, there could be different sort of not breakout rooms, that's not the right term, but essentially like product related demonstrations. So essentially imagine there's imagine Salesforce, imagine Dreamforce, right? So you can go to the, hey, how is their quoting tool improving in the next year, and how do you get the most out of it for SaaS companies or something like that? That could be one. And then there's, there could be two paths if you're talking about a smaller firm, or even one if you're talking about a really small firm, or there could be 10 if you're talking about Dreamforce, for example, that people choose to go to. And so they self-select, they go to whatever ones sort of make sense for them. And then there's, two or three of those. And then there's a dinner, that sort of thing. And then you have entertainment thereafter. And then depending on the size of the firm, how much you have to talk about, that sort of thing. You have possibly another day, possibly another 2 days, or even just, a half day the next day, that sort of thing. There probably is one session whereby it is a roadmap deep dive. Whereby, and again, this is more of a SaaS thing. So what exactly is going on, and your CPO is leading that probably.
Mhm.
What the heck is going on with this company and blah 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 blah. And yeah, and then you have different offshoot sort of things that happen, right? It's like, hey, have dinner with this CPO, all these great clients of ours that are serving to drive the roadmap and that sort of thing, right? Like, so lots of things to keep in mind there. And like this is and we had some great leads on this in Epidevity, and basically like this was their full-time job for like 6 months is what they
Hmm.
did, was just like prepare for this, and because there's so much that goes into it, and the first one is going to be is super painful, and it gets less painful as you go, because there's learnings and there's stuff that you can salvage from last time and that sort of thing. But it is a process. It is not something to be taken on lightly.
Mhm. As you were saying that, so I appreciate you adding the context. That's super helpful. As you were talking, I was remembering a conference I went to a few years ago with a friend, another crazy Canuck who also started a CRM company that also failed. Go figure. And used to live at least 45 minutes down the street here,
Yeah,
and he was working for this company that sold physiotherapy marketing services for physiotherapists. And they had this conference that they did, and they had, the way they thought about it was like a revenue ladder. They would sell somebody first I think it was like a book, and then a course, and then the conference, and then the service.
Hmm.
And it went from like $0 to $5 to $100 to 500 or $4,500. Maybe the conference was a few $100s. And then the service was like $4,000 a month. I've probably got it
sure.
wrong, but those are
Yep, yep,
directionally correct.
yep.
And they used the conference as their big selling point. I think they had 4 to 6 a year. And they had a mix, is sort of like the user conference we're talking about. But this was primarily used as, it was almost exactly as you've described it, where you're coming to learn. But it's also, they've got like at the end, they've got your typical like, very much, they're like, hey, now we're going to sell you. So feel free to leave the room if you're not interested in buying. And they're like doing the like, not high pressure sales tactics, but they're very forward about like, okay, the goal here is to convince you to buy our service. This is the $4,000 unit. And I just thought that was a really interesting go-to-market channel, that they were basically getting paid to acquire customers. And they did have their existing customers that came to learn. But the fact that they were doing these, 4 or 6 times a year kept them in really close contact with their existing customers, but they had a very healthy ratio of new customers to existing customers. I think it was probably like if there were 100 people, it was like 90 prospects and 10 existing paid recurring customers, so
Mhm.
10 of those. Yeah, it was a really interesting way.
I've
Yeah.
not seen that model at all. And maybe this is just the SaaS sort of side of things, whereby
Mhm.
ARR is king, and just getting more of that is what's most important, right? The idea of monetizing a conference, which is a lot of effort to put on and that sort of thing, for these
Mhm.
companies, it just doesn't really make as much sense in my mind. Just for this model. The one thing, and the other thing as well, is that you know you can maybe have, like, do you have enough juice to sort of sustain meeting up with folks like every couple months in terms of like new developments with your product and that sort of thing? I mean, I've
Mhm.
seen, and they've done an offshoot of this Epinevity, which, goodness matters local, whereby the folks that couldn't make it to the conference, they actually go to one of those major markets. And then it's just further down on that continuum that we described, right? It is more of the, steak dinner, with, a bit of a demo as to what's going on. Maybe the CRO's there, the CEO is there, that sort of thing. So, but no, in terms of it being about driving revenue in a very direct fashion, in terms of like
Mhm.
we're getting these fees, no, like I've not really seen that. Like in a SaaS world, the only time you can get away with that, I think, is that your software is just so in demand, right? Like it's just like crazy.
Mhm.
Maybe Salesforce makes a bunch of money off Dreamforce, for example. I'm not sure.
I wonder. I wonder. And just for clarity on that piece, they were they were 4 to 6 times a year. They were in different cities. So it was
Mhm.
basically like a road show where they were
Yep.
doing one every 2 months. it wasn't 6 unique different conferences of like different user conferences. It was the same. It was just recreated in 4 to 6 different geos.
So I'm going to do a bit of a throwback to, personas and ICP. The folks that you're selling to, what is the world that they're living in, right? What do they value, right? And so for us, when we thought about like the CSR representatives, that sort of thing, they had travel budget for one conference a year, let's say, right? We wanted it to be our conference that they want to go to, right? And they value that experience of being able to go somewhere, in the, like for a lot of them, in the middle of winter, to get somewhere hot, right? We're empathizing with these folks and that sort of thing. If your ICP, for example, is like, I'm not traveling for a conference on that. There's no way I'm doing that. But if you're coming to me, then I'll go. I will do that. But you better make it during working hours. Like maybe that's a stipulation. So understanding your ICP and what they would actually value from you sort of bringing to the table, that should shape, how this thing actually looks. Like, how well does your ICP map to Foo Fighters? I don't know. Salesforce is playing at a bit of a different level. They're a bit wider. So, it's a bit different. But would your folks value that, or would your folks value Simon Sinek coming and giving a speech, for example?
Love it. Let's talk about review sites.
Yeah.
So I want to keep us, I could talk with you, as we already did a 30-minute kind of preamble to this. We could keep this going for a long time. Let's talk about review sites. We're talking pay to play here. Put your review on here. It's, hundreds of thousands of dollars or tens of thousands of dollars. Let's start with the kind of range. What are we talking about here?
Yeah. So, I mean, when you're talking about CACs of this size, you're not really talking as much about Capterra and G2 Crowd and stuff like that, which we mentioned earlier. You're talking about Forrester. You're talking about Gartner. The Magic Quadrant is what one of them refers to it as, or that sort of thing. And there's another special name. And so basically these are pay to play, as you mentioned. So basically you have to pay Forrester a certain amount of dollars. Last I heard, it's kind of like 50K ish kind of thing. And they will sort of assess as to whether or not your software, whether or not it makes sense for you, or sorry, where are you in the grand scheme of things? And where do you plot in terms of, and they have like a sort of a X and Y axis kind of thing going on, and whether or not you're part of that coveted quadrant. So and in some cases too, right, is if you go to them and if they say like you could actually create a category potentially, right, in the sense of like, let's say B2B security software targeted towards I don't know, blah blah blah, I don't know, whatever industry you can think of. They might not have a study of that, they might not have a quadrant, but you know what, if you are one of the people that want to sort of put it up, then that might be a bit more dollars and that sort of thing, and then you'll sort of get your own sort of going like that. And those could be, I mean, they could be a very good use of funds, because I know I've used them as a buyer of MarTech and revenue technology and that sort of thing. Even if it just gets you to a long list, right? Or even if it gets you to a short list in terms of a vendor acquisition, like that could be quite worthwhile, right? Especially if you understand, did they come from this or did they not? And as part of that 50K or 100K or whatever it is, you have the ability to give away this study. And I'm sure a lot of our folks that are SaaS people, you wanted to understand what is the best DSP in this last quarter or whatever. So you gave Trade Desk your information in order to get that study from them, right? So it's a lead gen magnet that's quite useful, especially if you're in that coveted spot, right? So this is something where you want to be pretty sure that you're going to get a good spot on there before you sort of play and that kind of thing. But it could be pretty useful in terms of just getting on people's radar and as a lead magnet tool.
Gotcha. So this is top of funnel for longer deal cycles, longer sales cycles with a lot more maybe buying influences where it's a little bit more of a political sale. This is gonna be, I think, both almost a lead magnet and a accelerant in the pipeline that's going to help deals move forward, because they can say, oh, well, they're in a Gartner study, or they're in this quadrant, magic quadrant, or whatever it is.
It's that nobody got fired by buying IBM kind of idea, right? So you could take that, and again, it might not get you the deal, because the I don't want to belittle the effort that the account executives sort of put into this, and the sales cycle, and bringing in the product people at the right time, and blah blah blah, and how you do contracting, but it will help you get to the table, which is kind of nice, right?
Totally fair. We've kind of talked about the 50K kind of baseline. What are you expecting from if you're a B2B software company? What are some rough results that you're expecting? Like leads coming in? Do you have a sense of volume? Do you have a sense of anything that you've seen in the past? And obviously these are not hard commitments that, guaranteed you spend X, you get Y, but can you give me a rough range of what these kind of look like?
I mean, I hate to obfuscate, but basically what you want to do is you want to, put together a plan and kind of figure out okay, well, and you could even talk to Forrester or Gartner and sort of get some information from them and say, and obviously, you have to put a lens of suspicion on that, and talk to others in the industry that have actually used them for this purpose before, and that kind of thing, to understand, how many deals, or not how many deals, let's say, but how many leads did you get out of this study, right? How many have actually sort of how, and you could ask them the question, right, of what's the reach, if it's a net new study for them, right? Then they won't have any historical on it. But if they do this every quarter and you're getting into Q4, okay, talk to me about what other companies have experienced in the Q3 study or in the Q1 study or whatever, to give it a bit of time to sort of understand. And then you plop that in and just okay, what's this going to cost? What's it going to take in terms of time? How do I sort of monetize that time, or not monetize, but put a cost against that time appropriately? And then it's okay, this is what I think it will lead to from a pipeline generation perspective. Do I have any reason to believe it would have a different sort of tinge to it in terms of close rate? Maybe, I don't know. And then you compare it against the other possible revenue channels that you have at your disposal, right?
Love it.
Yeah.
Okay.
I've never done this, but there probably is a play of, maybe talk to Forrester and talk to Gartner and see who can do the best for you and try them first.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm sure there's some other players. I've talked to a few others, but no need to go into all of them. I think the kind of review sites we've talked about, and then these are the big magic quadrant producers that are that are interesting. Let's land the episode. Let's land this kind of episode arc with what are some other channels outside your top 3 that might be coming online at the kind of 50K deal size and up.
So the other things to just think about really quickly is just, there's lots of touch points that are occurring here, both from a sales perspective and a marketing perspective. So having an attribution software in place whereby you have all that information in one spot. I mentioned, Triple Whale before, that becomes even more sort of useful here. Listen to previous episodes that we've had together to sort of understand, the different attribution methodologies that can be applied in order to sort of attribute value appropriately. So attribution software is one. The other thing is just the alerts. Like I mentioned, just really having that tightness, and this relates to the attribution somewhat. But basically, you need to your sales team needs to understand what is going on with each of these stakeholders at the companies at whatever point, right? And are they interacting with the stuff that we're putting across? Are they not? That sort of thing. And related to those alerts, there's other technologies that you can use, right? So if you send, let's say it's a proposal, or even if you send even if it's an ebook or something like that, there's technologies you could layer on top whereby it tells you, are they accessing it? Where are they accessing it? For how long? For example, are they lingering on the pricing page of the proposal? That tells you that maybe that is a factor and you need to have a conversation on that. Or are they lingering on the IT sort of security stuff? And maybe that sort of tells you something there. So having that in a pretty tight order. And then the last one is just the site personalization side of things. and just making sure that that's, or I shouldn't say making sure, but that might be an avenue to be considered, whereby, and to make this real, like imagine, you have a legal person, like a legal person, a lawyer from a given company that you're looking to sell into, and they are, late in the sales process because legal's involved, and you're in contracting, and they go to their website. What do you want this lawyer that is from, the CPG category, let's say, what do you want them seeing on the homepage? What is front and center in terms of that messaging? So it's that kind of granular. So it's pretty heady stuff, but that's also something to be considered too.
Love it. We've talked about some analytics. I'm just trying to go back through my notes. Anything we've missed from this whole episode today, or any of the ARC, anything that didn't really fit into the kind of framework that we tried to stick to?
No, I mean, I can't think of anything offhand. I mean, we've had pretty, I'd say interesting. I mean, I'm terribly biased, but also, lengthy discussions on this stuff. So I think we got a good amount sort of covered. So no, I think this covers it.
This has probably been like, I don't know, at least 6, maybe 8 hours of us kind of having discussion together. We'll probably make it to like 3 to 4 hours of content together. So
yep.
I want to thank you for just the time investment that you've made here in coming on the episode and sharing, and all the pre-work we did and all the side chats that we had in between. If people are listening, and I know you only take on, 1 client a quarter, 2 clients a quarter,
2 clients a quarter.
Most.
That's maximum. Yeah.
If somebody is trying to wants to get in touch with you and say, hey, I'm interested in having to talk to this guy, he seems like he knows what he's doing, what's the best way for them to get in touch?
Yeah, I mean, I would probably just go to the website and submit a lead gen form. Basically, I'm a 1-person operation. That's it. So I typically reply within 24 hours on that. And, there are other options in the sense of micro consulting and that sort of thing, even if I am full up, which I am for Q1, luckily. So, but yeah, feel free to drop me a line through that, and, happy to have a conversation with folks.
Fantastic. And that's 8020cmo.com.
That's right.
All words, no numbers.
All words, no numbers. So I have a spelling test at the outset in order to qualify people. So it's great.
I probably fail that because I mistype predictable revenue all the time.
Yeah. Well, I'm coming up in the fractional CMO rankings. So there you go. So maybe organic will be the friend of our searchers. But no, Colin, thanks for having me on, man. I appreciate this. And, this has been, one of the most interesting or 3 of the most interesting conversations I've had all year on this subject. So, really, really happy to sort of chat with somebody with your level of knowledge on this stuff. And had a ball, and looking forward to chatting again in 2023.
Right on. Well, thank you again. It definitely was a super interesting conversation. I feel like I learned a lot. It's always fun to kind of get in there and rehash some ideas and things that, I've gone through and I've seen our clients go through, and to get a chance to learn from somebody like you has been pretty fantastic. Hopefully for the audience listening, it was good content and it was helpful. And just thank you, Michael, for coming on the show. And thanks to everybody who made it all the way to the end of this episode. And if for anybody that made it to the end of all of them, thank you for listening. Let us know if you got any feedback. We'll see you all next week. All right. Cheers.
Thanks, everyone.